So with that, let's get started with today's speaker. Wes Teller is the Global Solutions Manager for Accounting and Finance at Perceptive, and I will let him introduce himself. Wes, you can begin.
All right, thank you very much, Marianne. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. I'm very excited, so let's jump right into it. So first, we'll go over our agenda a little bit. Usually people click through the slide. I'm actually going to talk about it for a minute. We're going to start with, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. But then if you're enticed by this title to unlock the value of your invoices, we're going to talk a little bit about what that means to your company, what value we're actually talking about, both monetary and intrinsic value. And if that's interesting to you, then we're going to then proceed on to the, all right, if this is something you want to pursue, how do you pursue that? What business initiatives can you take to actually go about unlocking that value in your invoices? And then sort of the what you do to accomplish that, what internal actions you take, what technology you would go after, what services you would go after to actually start unlocking that value. So a little bit about me. I'm, as Marianne said, the Global Solution Manager, sometimes called the Global Industry Manager, for Accounting and Finance for Perceptive Software. That is an R&D focused role. So what I do is I work on our software solution development. With regards to accounting and finance, I speak to our customers a lot to try to get information about the challenges they're facing and looking for directions that we can grow to align our software with what people are looking for today. I came to this role from over a decade of experience within accounting and IT, doing solutions and project work. I've always had a strong focus in the procure-to-pay space, so the sourcing, procurement, accounts payable, cash management, payment, all that stuff. Through that, I've done a lot of project management. I actually spent 4 years sitting on the steering committee at Lexmark, the parent company of Perceptive, that set procure-to-pay policy and strategy. So I have extensive domain experience, and it's nice. Perceptive allows me to blog and occasionally do webinars like this where I get to talk about the things I did in my old job and not so much the solution development, which is very technical R&D focused work. So I enjoy getting the chance to both talk to customers and give presentations like this. So jumping right into it, state of the industry, economic recovery is still slow. Short-term interest rates have been hovering near zero for many years, and most forecasts are not showing those interest rates suddenly climbing anytime soon. And companies are still sitting on their cash. Companies that have cash are hoarding it. They are not investing it in the business or in the market because there's no return, and they don't see a lot of growth opportunity. On top of that, risky investments are out, clearly because of the events of 2008 and beyond and the financial crisis. Banks are being forced both by their investors and by regulations to take much more conservative profiles with their money. There's not as much of an appetite for return. There's more focus on stability. So we're really seeing a very cool recovery. Companies are doing better. Many companies in 2013 had strong cash generation. Combine this with the fact that they've already been hoarding cash. It's an interesting model because suddenly there are all these funds available for investment, but there's no markets to invest them in, and companies are leery of internally investing. So most people would tell you conditions like this aren't great, but no, it's an opportunity for innovation. And there's a lot of companies out there that are actually creating new investment models. They're seeing that there's all this unused cash. They're seeing that there's an opportunity for it, and they're going out and finding ways that we can open up new markets and get a return on that money that we're sitting on. So you're probably a little confused now because this is supposed to be in AP operations, and I'm talking about the banking industry. Fair enough. But really, they're starting to see overlap because these companies are really shifting the way we view AP invoices. We, for a long time, have looked at the AP process as a cost center. It's something that we have to do as just part of basic operations, and we can trim a little fat, but it's not something that's an opportunity. And the goal of this presentation today, and I think a lot of these new investment models, is really to shift our focus from seeing invoices as just an operational necessity and looking at them as a trading commodity, something that we can actually exchange back and forth, that it's really like a bond note. It is a long-term payable that there's, an investment period and return on. So if we're going to say that in plain English, that means that there's ways that an AP department can now make money off doing what they do already, which is paying bills. Now, why is that? It's because, as we said, it's this imbalance in companies. There are many companies that have hoarded cash. Larger companies have more cash than they know what to do with. They're sitting on it and waiting for a good investment opportunity, but that cash is really not doing anything right now. And then there's other companies who are operationally strapped for cash who do not have the working capital they need to invest in new opportunities, and oftentimes those companies are trading partners already. If they actually meet and discuss this, suddenly there's an opportunity for both companies to benefit, and for a profit to be made, and for investment capital to be opened up. So in summation about that, what I really want you to think about is what it would mean to you if you could tell your CFO that your department was not only self-funded, but that it made money last year. AP departments have always been a cost center. They have always been something that it was just trim the fat, never unlock value. And so this is a paradigm shift in how we view the AP process. Not that it's a cost center, but that it actually has the potential to bring in revenue through efficient operations. So let's talk about a few numbers. I want you to just look at these numbers for a second. Think about what they mean to you. $1 billion, this is just a placeholder number for the conversation. I want to assume that your company does $1 billion in AP spend, maybe more or less. That's a rough correlation. You're going to have about 10 to 40 AP employees for that $1 billion. There is no standard here. Every company is different. Every company has different operations. There's a wide range, but we can say that based on that $1 billion of spend, we should expect an AP department to cost somewhere between $500,000 and $2 million to the organization, depending on where they're run out of, if it's a shared service center, what sort of optimization or straight-through processing initiatives you've already taken on. This means that the maximum opportunity for cost savings, if you eliminate every bit of activity within the AP department, which we know is impossible, the maximum savings you can get is $2 million. And that is going to have organizational impacts far beyond just AP. There's all sorts of services that your AP department does that would be impacted by the loss or automation of an AP department. So compare that to some different numbers. Again, the $1 billion should look familiar. It's our assumed AP spend. Now let's say 20% of the discounts offered on that $1 billion are not being taken today. We have a lot of industry surveys that say that most companies have an opportunity for between 0.5% to 1% of their spend as discounts. So 20% being missed, which most companies do not capture 80% of their discounts. It's very hard to capture discounts and process within 10 to 15 days. But if we say even slightly below 20% more at a 1.5% average discount rate, that's a $3 million savings opportunity. So these are the numbers I want you to think about, and the difference between simply efficiency and then pursuing a revenue activity through accounts payable, some way to generate funds or free up capital for your company. So as you probably experienced a lot today, everyone is under pressure to cut costs. It's 2 to 3% per year. What have you done for me lately? What else can we do to trim the fat? What other initiatives are we going to take to cut down on cost? This is a never-ending cycle, and it's marginal benefit at best. Really, when we talk about that $500,000 to $2 million, trimming a few percent off that does not have much of a bottom line impact to the company. But unfortunately, that continues to be the focus in a lot of organizations. We really feel like they should be going for those enhanced value projects, things about analytics, driving better decisions in the business, opening up new revenue opportunities, and exploring entirely new business models. That's where our investment is best placed. Yet, in the endless cycle of wanting to show continuous improvement, a lot of times we just say we're going to set slightly lower budget expectations every year, and that's how we're going to get to our efficiency. Personally, I hate that. That is not a model for driving a world-class service organization around procure-to-pay. That is a model for continually eroding services. And, you will constantly be cutting something that is important to the business rather than pursuing something that is strategic to the business. So when we talk about a self-funded cost center, the objective here is really partially to generate revenue, but it's partially to open up those opportunities for a business unit so that it can really go after the things that are important. It's when you're freed from that 2 to 3% every year, and how are you always going to find some savings, marginal benefit, you can go after the really big things to your company. That's why we like this as a strategy, and that's why we advocate it strongly for I advocate it strongly for AP departments. So how do you, if this is something you're interested in, how do you actually pursue this as a strategy? And again, it helps to have the arguments. So we talked about discounts before. Working capital is another great way that you can drive value into the business by partnering with your procurement organization, by looking at vendor terms on invoices, by simple operations. If you shift the average pay terms for that $1 billion of spend by 1 day, then you're freeing up almost $3 million of working capital that your business, that you can then go invest into another strategic portion of the business. So the point being that you really cannot afford to not have at least some strategy around working capital discount management. It's something that you should be thinking about and talking about and building up a coalition within your organization about how you do this. So how do you do that? You start by looking at your own company. Most people at this point may want to jump right into, okay, here's the solution we have to do this. I don't think I can get to solutions in this call. I think that if you don't first consider internal strategy, then you should always be weary of a solution at this point. There is no one-size-fits-all. The first thing you have to do is an internal and external analysis. So the first things you want to say are, who am I? How much cash do we have? What's our current cash cycle? Very important is not just how much cash you have, but where is that cash? Your cash may be tied up overseas until you talk to your treasurer and really understand what is the liquidity of your cash reserves. You don't really understand what capital you have for discount programs or what your working capital requirements are. If you don't understand your cash cycle, what the objectives are, how that relates to, are you a publicly traded company or a privately held company? What metrics and objectives for cash generation have you set for the year? You can't have a comprehensive strategy around this. If you don't know the regulations, some industries are not available for discounts. If they're nonprofit or grant funded, like many universities or healthcare organizations, you may not even be able to take discounts. That may be something that interferes with grant funding. So all of these things need to be considered before you even begin to formulate a cash strategy. Once you understand what your strategy is, that's when you start looking at your vendors. So really you need to know who they are, and a lot of times this is an analytic struggle. We feel like we know who our vendors are. Sure, we have a list. We have their payment information, but a lot of time vendor data is really what, I think the catchphrase for it, it's the corollary to big data. It's dark data. It's information that may be in the contracts in the organization. It may be somebody knows it. It may be the supplier relationship manager or the contract team has the information, but it's not something you can get your hands on and certainly present in a list, where they're geographically located, what their relative size is to the business you do with them, what services or activity they provide, are they key or strategic. Your vendors are your trading partner here, so you need to know a lot about them to come up with comprehensive strategy. You need to know how you treat them today. Some companies are mono-focused on a single aspect of sourcing and pricing. They may say that they want to negotiate for the lowest price. They may say that they want to get the most extended terms possible. They may have a discount strategy, but it tends to be just one, and that's really a limited view of how you should treat your vendor population and how you should work with them, because they have their own initiatives and objectives. And based on their relative size to you, you may or may not be that important to them. You may be extremely strategic to them. So if you don't understand that, if you don't understand the leverage, and more important, you don't understand their objectives, you can't necessarily take the best strategy. If they're focused on getting the best prices they can, and your strategy is also focused on price, there's going to be a conflict, and there's not going to be a lot of traction made on your side. If you understand that they are price-focused and that you're not going to have any sort of competitive information around price, then you can shift to a discount or a term focus and realize benefit to your company. But it's important you realize that there's a broader discussion going on here than just a simple procurement discussion, and that it extends to operations too. So once you understand this, you understand the opportunities. And so, again, what it means to you, what if you can deliver an additional $3 million per year, either straight revenue through discounts, through realizing more working capital, or through other methods that your company can then use to reinvest into the business. And more importantly, what does that mean to your status within the department and your ability to go tackle larger strategic initiatives? So, again, assuming you're interested at this point, you now have to think, how do you do this? So we like to say that a successful technology or services or software project, anything, it's got to consider people, process, and technology as a whole. There are no silver bullets in technology. There's no service that you can sign up for that is going to take care of all of this for you. There's no software you can implement that does it. And without that first considering people and process, you're not going to have a very successful technology project. I believe it's a Gartner statistic that my colleagues in the UK, Simon Collins, always throws out, is that 75% of IT projects fail because they don't adequately consider scope. But yeah, that was an aside. First thing you need to do is start with a team. I've thrown around a lot of groups here: procurement, accounts payable, treasury. They all need to be involved because this is a procure-to-pay process. It is end-to-end, and when departments operate within silos, they work at cross purposes, they don't align strategy, they may duplicate efforts, and it's not until you get all these people into a room and have them thinking about this that you can maximize the benefit that you're getting out of any sort of cash management initiative around your payables. So obviously procurement, because they start the process, they own the vendor relationship. Accounts payable, because they cover the operations, and that's how you're going to get information about performance, where you're in term compliance, where you're missing or taking discounts. And you're obviously need to have treasury involved, because there's all sorts of hedging and cash forecasting operations, and typically treasury is going to own your investment clip levels, so they need to be involved in the conversation. But it's also good to extend this to IT. Obviously, you should get them involved early as part of a technology selection, and finance, just so that they're going to want to have a say in how that money gets allocated. So it's important to bring them in early. So once you have defined a team, and I'll talk a little bit more about how you define that team. I think it's very important that you find your one executive sponsor first. I will go into more detail there, but you don't just form a team overnight. The first thing to do is to find one or two people who really understand what it is you want to do, and then go get an executive champion. But we'll talk about that at the very end, where I talk about how you get started with one of these projects. Assuming you have your team formed, there's a couple groups that you're going to want to have. Obviously, you need an executive steering committee, sort of breaking out your racy, they're the responsible. So they're going to own the overall objectives, the strategy, and more important, the initiative, which the initiative is, free up cash. You then get down into strategy and plan level. So once you get to plan, that's where you have a team that's really going to be, it's best if it's the individual department managers or leads. It's got to be people, though, who are empowered to make decisions, who can change things in business processes, and who can really get down into the nitty-gritty of the implementation. And then these last two bullets, obviously, in order for this to be successful, it can't just be an executive or a planning conversation. It's got to be rolled out. And the way it's rolled out is through, you need to do organizational change management, training, education. It's another area where I've seen a lot of projects go south. They're planned excellently, but then the execution and the onboarding of teams into a new project, it isn't handled well, and it doesn't, as a result, it's not successful. It takes a long time to start realizing results. Now, that change management team can be a separate team, or it can be the actual user team that does the project. I've seen it work both ways, and I've seen it fail both ways. Sometimes a change management team just isn't very responsive. They don't feel accountability or ownership for what they're doing. But oftentimes that end user team doesn't have enough time to budget to training. So you really have to think about your user groups and what they can do before you can come up with a piece of strategy there. Okay? So, and from almost a decade of doing this stuff, well, more than a decade of doing this stuff, a couple pieces of advice I would throw out there when you're starting to put together a team to look at cash management. No sacred cows. When you put together 4 to 5 different departments, you're going to have conflicting executive objectives. They're going to all have their own KPIs. They're all going to say, well, this hurts me. You have to leave that at the door. This is a big picture initiative. We're going to make money for the company, and so if it costs, and we're talking potentially millions of dollars here, so if somebody in one department has to hire a person or take on a little extra work or absorb some cost of a technology project, then maybe that puts them over budget, but you can always explain that to your executives. So that's one thing. You have to be able to leave that stuff at the door. Also, staying revenue focused is important. All those departments I listed out, they're traditional cost centers. So the idea of, we've all heard you have to, spend money to make money. This is a revenue-focused project. It's an investment that we expect to have a return. It is not a cost-cutting initiative. And so it requires a shift of perceptions away from what we normally do in operations into something that almost feels more sales-focused. You're thinking about, how do we make money off this? Picking a strategy, there's different levels of strategy, and I don't think people consider this enough. There's the general initiative. You want to be able to make money off paying your invoices, either through discounts, through working capital management, or through these other programs I'm going to discuss shortly. That's your objective. But then you're going to have a strategy. You may want to go after all those, but you can't do them all at once. So pick one to go after typically. You want to be able to focus, get one thing done, and move on to the next. Can't do it all at once. And in that, you want to actually make a plan and set a timeline. This is your, the objective is forever. The strategy may be year to year. The plan should be, I think the ideal time is actually 90 days. I've seen many, many plans go for 6 months, year, 18 months. They don't show any results. Nobody knows when they've succeeded or failed because nobody set criteria for success or failure. So they linger on. They say, oh, well, we're still working the plan. Well, you should know at the end of 90 days if that objective has succeeded or failed. And if you can't know within 90 days, you probably took on too much work within that period of time. These projects can linger on because you set too long of a timeline and you set too open of a set of objectives without really clarifying what it was that would be accomplished in that period of time. So small steps. Okay. So one thing you may be questioning right now is I'm talking a lot about discounts. I talk about discounts because it's a very easy way to quantify the opportunity. But again, I want you to think of invoices as a tradable commodity, similar to a bond note. It's something that you're going to pay the funds in 30, 60, 90 days. And if it's paid early, you're going to take a discount on it. You may negotiate paid in late for a fee, but it's in that way very similar to a trading commodity. Discounts is just a nice way to quantify it because we attach a number to it. But it goes beyond that. A lot of people just say, well, we don't really take discounts, or we take all our discounts. That's an interesting one because a lot of times people think they take all their discounts because they take all their discounts that they have discount terms with on their vendors. There's a big population of discounts that show up on the invoice that people never even consider because it's not in their contract terms, it's not in the vendor record, and just the PO terms get applied or the vendor terms from the master. And so they don't know that there's a huge population of discounts that they haven't even seen. A lot of times also people aren't taking discounts because they feel they've talked to Treasury and Treasury says, well, discounts aren't, that's not where we want to get a return on our money. We'd rather invest it elsewhere, or we'd rather do hedging with it. I categorically reject that because if you work out the APR for a 210 net 30 discount, which is pretty standard, that's about a 37% APR. So if your treasurer is beating that with their short-term investments, I'd like to shake their hand. But I don't think that happens very often. So discounts are an extremely attractive way for a company to use its funds. And it's also an education issue. A lot of times Treasury may support this in theory, but they have hedging concerns, cross-company trading, FX hedging that they have to do. They have to be able to plan and forecast cash effectively, and they're going to say that discounts and early payments and supply chain financing and other things are going to interfere with their ability to do that job. Again, there's things that actually, a lot of the projects around AP and procurement are all about getting better analytics, better forecasting, faster information available to Treasury sooner. So a lot of times they actually help with hedging and forecasting rather than hurt. So I think that's a perception issue that needs to be addressed a lot. Okay. So if we've talked about people, process, there's the technology aspect of this. Again, technology can't stand alone, but neither can people and process. It's very hard to just take on these initiatives through skunkworks, through simply trying to call people up and make things happen. Technology can help with many aspects of this. So simplest way we can do this is simply increasing the discount capture rate. Again, as I said, we have a lot of industry statistics and customer conversations that suggest between 0.5% to 1% of your AP spend is immediately available as discounts. But most people can't capture these discounts because it's very hard. It's typically a 10-day term. And in order to do that, oftentimes you have mailing, you have internal routing, you may have approvals that need to happen for non-PO invoices. You really have to target AP turning that document around within 3 days or less in order to capture that discount, which that can be very difficult. You may take your discounts anyways. I've talked to a few companies that take their discounts late. I'm always surprised by that. It's certainly something where your vendors will probably make it up to you in other ways, and it's not a good way to build trust. But really, the best way to do this is just process faster. So if you think about this, AP automation and electronic invoicing are the projects that really help speed up, get you to that 24 to, either a straight-through process, a no-touch invoice, or a 24 to 48-hour cycle time. Those are the sweet spots where you can suddenly capture all of your discounts. And it's more important, again, realizing the discounts that are not currently part of your vendor record are things that you could go out and capture if you have the right technology that will show you where those gaps are, where you may have discrepancies between your vendor records and your POs and the terms that are actually being offered on billing. Okay. There's dynamic discounting. Dynamic discounting, if you're not familiar with it, less and less I have to educate people on this, but still it seems about a quarter of the people I talk to still haven't heard of dynamic discounting. It's what's called a sliding scale discount. It means rather than having the set 10-day terms, you can pay at any point and take a larger or smaller discount. It gets smaller as it approaches the set payment date, and it can be offered at any time on any payable, whether or not a discount was originally in the contract terms or the PO terms. The nice thing about dynamic discounts is they can, since it's not part of the vendor or PO contract, it can happen at any time, and it can happen when companies need cash the most. So that makes it very different from contract negotiated terms, which may only happen once or twice a year, and people are going to be very conservative with their discount terms because since they're agreeing to this for a long period of time, they don't want to overextend themselves on discounts. Dynamic discounting is typically they need cash, they need it today, and they're willing to pay a very high rate. And if you think about that 37% rate on a standard 210 net 30 discount, you can see what very high would actually mean. So there's a big potential for return here. Now, obviously, you could be doing this today. You could call up your vendor and say, hey, do you need money? We'll pay you, today for a 5% discount. And in fact, I've seen that happen a couple times at different businesses I've been to. Companies would call up and say, we need to be paid right now. And typically we would do it. But that's not a very efficient way to manage this. So we're going to talk a little bit about, you can do this through a portal. So there's a technology play where you can do it through your own ERP and your own portal. But there's also services that facilitate the buyer-seller ask-bid relationship. That's a way to manage your discounts and also help you manage that discount program. You may be very leery of extending a heavy discount right at the end of a quarter or right during a financial reporting period. They have ways to manage that, and that can be very important in the success of a program like dynamic discounting. Okay. There's cash management through payment methods. This one is fraught with danger, I will say, because this can be slow to move. It's heavily engaged with your vendor base, and if you don't trust your executive team, this can be open to manipulation. So, for instance, checks. You can manage cash and your working capital through just issuing checks. You get float out of it. We all know we're reporting on things the same way, and it's been paid on that date. But it does take a few days for those funds to be deducted. Personally, I think that cash management is broader than just cash management. I think from a procure-to-pay standpoint, I think you need to think of the operational impacts of checks, that you have lost checks, there's potential for fraud and misapplied payments, there's heavy processing costs associated with them. If you're thinking of checks as a cash management strategy, I don't advocate it. Wire and ACH is, to me, still the gold standard for how you conduct businesses with your key and strategic partners. It does nothing for cash except help build trust that you're going to get payments on time and they're not going to be misapplied, which I would not discount that. And then there's credit cards, which you can always shift a vendor to a credit card and get an immediate 45 days of cash float on it. So that's a very attractive option. It's not a procurement card, it's just the payment method is through a credit card. Now, what procurement will often tell you is if this, or other people may tell you, is that when this happens, vendors are eating that transactional fee, and so they're just going to turn right around and put that into your pricing so that this is going to be a zero net benefit. I disagree with that for the same reason that I don't think markets react instantly. Simply because you are using a credit card doesn't mean that your vendor is going to go out and hike prices tomorrow. A good percentage of your vendors will do nothing, despite the fact that they're eating this fee. It's just the cost of doing business to them, and those that do, it may take them a year or two. So I do think as a short-term fix, credit card is interesting, and it's certainly a viable option. Rebates can make it very interesting, but it is something that, you know, there's two sides to that coin. And honestly, from the software standpoint, sometimes all you need is better data. Again, we talked about dark data for vendors. What do you really need to get, you know, the best pay terms with that vendor? You just need more information about them. You know, how strategic they are to you. You know, what is important to them. For procurement, you may have set all these terms for vendors, but how are they being complied with? Are they being, are they billing you that way? Are the terms showing up in the invoices? Are things being coded the correct way? Are PO terms being are vendor terms being overridden at the purchase order level? So all of that stuff is very important to ensure that you're actually pursuing the strategies that make sense. AP is where a lot of this crystallizes, because honestly, everybody else is very much strategic. AP is very deep in the operations here. So they're going to be the ones that see the most of the process. They're going to be able to identify the bottlenecks, and they're going to be able to get you to that faster processing that enables better discount capture. And then visibility is, again, when you're talking about working capital management, it's not just about freeing up the funds, it's about knowing they're there. Simply because you free up working capital funds, it doesn't help you if you haven't forecasted, if you don't understand your cash outlays and your inbound cash. So forecasting is critical to actually realizing a benefit from working capital. Just because you freed up $3 million, if Treasury doesn't know that and know it quantifiably and they know it's going to continue that way, they haven't actually freed up that money. But it also gives them better ability to forecast and hedge, which has its own benefit to the company. Okay. That's a little about the software and technology platforms, which I'm being very generic about. I'm not trying to influence your decision. There's really a variety of services and software out there. Not all of them Perceptive offers. I think that you need to pick the one that makes the most sense for your company based on your business needs, as I said. So services is a very interesting one. So a lot of times these projects fail because people try to do them themselves without knowledgeable resources. Now, that second statement, there's dedicated partners who use a revenue share model for cash management and who are therefore committed to the success of your projects. I agree with that statement, otherwise I wouldn't have put it on there, but I'm going to quantify it right now, or qualify it right now. You do need to be careful about a revenue share model, because a perfect example of this is the parent company for Perceptive, Lexmark. It's a printer manufacturer. Their motto is print less, save more. What they do is they help companies actually reduce their printing footprint to overall reduce costs. Now, they get paid for the number of pages they go through. So it would be in their best interest to actually increase printing and increase sales. So the thing about a revenue share model is you have to be careful that they're actually considering your corporate best interests rather than something that drives activity or click charges or throughput through the model. So I think most companies I've dealt with who have this model are very, open and honest in their interests, but just make sure those corporate interests align. I think the perfect example I've seen on this is something called the PO flip, which you may be familiar with. It's something a lot of online portals are offering, where you can hit a button to turn a PO into an invoice and bill back, which sounds great in practice, but the whole point of a purchase order to me is that you raise it and then it's more of a blanket. You do hundreds of invoices against it. You realize economies of scale. A PO flip just drives more invoices and more non-value add work. So it's one of those things that it might be good for them to sell, but you have to think about how it aligns to your strategic business model. So, as I talked about dynamic discounting, it's something that there's services, there's companies who really facilitate this peer-to-peer communication and set up ask bid and buyer-seller relationships. So I think this is a really good opportunity that a lot of people should look at, but it is new. The market is not that big yet. There's not a lot of trading going on there, but there are a lot of predictions for rapid growth. There's a more traditional model for this, which is simply supply chain financing. You can go to your bank, and they will negotiate with your vendors to extend payment terms rather than paying early. You're simply paying later because the bank is paying on your behalf on time. The advantage is that this is extremely low risk. The banks are typically doing it with their own funds. They can do it with your funds for a greater gain share with a slightly more risk. But overall, invoices are such a stable traded commodity. That's why there's been so much investment in technology here in the recent years. So this is a very low risk, but it's also low return as a result. And as always, the vendors may begin to offset costs and pricing over time. What I think is interesting is that banks are starting to look at dynamic discounting and offer blended models where they'll take the discount but still pay you later as a cash management strategy. The one reason treasurers don't like discounts is because it inevitably results in an early payment, which is bad for their DPO, and it's bad for their overall cash cycle metric. So if they're being measured on that, they don't like it. That's a kind of a straw man argument, honestly, because discounts don't make up a big percentage of overall spend, and it's not going to have more than a day or maybe two if you're in days of impact to DPO, and that's if you're making tens of millions of dollars on your discount program, which is a good thing. So, but it's interesting because it does offset that argument and allows you to do a little better forecasting. There's credit card financing, which is exactly what I described, but there's actually companies that will go out and onboard your vendor base, exactly like supply chain financing, but instead to credit card payments. So they're still paid on time. You just pay later, but again, they're eating that fee. And some of the companies I've talked to in this space are very interesting. So the problem is you're never going to get your Tier 1, Tier 0 suppliers on credit cards. They simply won't absorb the cost. It's too big for them, and they're too strategic. So this has to be something where you gain profit in the aggregate over tons and tons of vendors. You're not going to find a few white elephants that you can go shoot that are going to suddenly make a big return for you. But since there's companies that help you and help with the onboarding, it can be very strategic. And analytics is something, personally, I think you should always do this in-house. You understand your own data better than anybody else, but there are organizations where this is the right decision, particularly if you're on a new ERP that you don't know, or if you don't have a strong center of excellence around your ERP that has deep knowledge. It can be better to pay somebody to come in and do your analytics for you, and that can help you with that decision-making process and strategic initiatives. Okay, so how do you get started? What are the first steps? Again, you have to start with your executive sponsor, and that is one executive sponsor. Eventually, you're going to need to get 3 or 4 executives in the room as part of your steering committee, but if you start with them, there will always be one person who objects, and this won't go anywhere. You have to find that one executive who agrees with you, get them on your side and fully vested in making this happen, and they will bring the other executives on board. But if you try to do it with everybody at once as a presentation, then it's going to get stalled. Once you form your team, don't jump right to solving the problem. You got to plan for the plan. Understand that this is a long-term initiative. You don't have to do it all right away. You need to bring in the right people first, and then you can start seeing what you want to attack. And I stand by those 90-day intervals. The best projects I've been on have been run in short bursts like that. I've been on 2-year, 3-year projects before too. They never go well. They're always behind schedule. The 90-day projects, we almost always hit our goal for that 90 days because we take something that we can take on. You're going to want to find partners and coaches. Go to LinkedIn. Go to your extended network. Talk to people. Talk to different vendors. Go to trade shows. There are tons of people who've done this before and who are more than happy to talk to you about it. I'm talking to you about it right now. And there's anybody is usually thrilled to talk about this stuff. You know, the guys who are into this, like me, are usually very excited to talk about it. The team's got to be empowered. They got to have that decision making. So until that happens, there's no point in proceeding. Otherwise, they're just going to get brushed off. It's got to be a significant time investment. This is not a hobby. You know, when you take on a strategic initiative like this, you know, you should recognize that you're trying to make millions of dollars for your company. So that is worth, you know, at least a 25% time investment, probably a 50% time investment for most people. You have to have funds to allocate to it, because that's how we talk about things in corporate culture today, is that if there is not a budget attached to it, then it's probably not going to go anywhere. And if you're having trouble, reach out for help early. You know, this is, again, just 10 years of project management experience talking, that you don't want to languish on a project just because you have a roadblock or a stumbling block. Reach out for help early, talk to people, bring in resources, and you'll break through those barriers a lot faster. And that is it, and I'd be thrilled to take some questions.
Thanks so much, Wes. Once again, if you want to ask a question, there is a question box down in the lower right-hand corner of the dashboard that is running the webinar today called Questions. Just post it there. We did get one question submitted just about the middle of the presentation. Are you proposing that payables be bundled together and then sold in a manner similar to a structured payment settlement? If so, who is the buyer?
I would not. I mean, there are factoring deals like that still happen. I mean, similar to how AR is bundled. I'm not sure that a market has opened up for that yet. It's interesting, and it could happen in theory, but no, I haven't seen a lot of services emerge around that, or a lot of investment opportunity, but I'm actually surprised I haven't. As I said, payables are a very stable trading commodity. You know, people pay their invoices very consistently. So, and it's a short-term investment that they're going to get paid on. So I'm surprised there are not more factoring deals, but that's not to say there's not, and I haven't just seen it, because there's a lot of venture capital money around these business models that's floating around.
Okay. Another question from Sharon. It's unclear from your presentation. Should we be pursuing discounts, longer payment terms, supply chain financing? Which one?
It depends on your company. That's really something that, as I said, if you're not looking at your vendor base, if you're not looking at your cash position, then you probably don't understand which strategy you should be pursuing. But more importantly, I think you have to consider a blended strategy, because your vendors are going to have different priorities. Some vendors are going to be very adverse to price negotiations. Others are going to be very adverse to term negotiations. And if you try a one-size-fits-all strategy, it's easier for you, but you're missing a big opportunity. And the opportunity is far larger than the cost of pursuing 2 or 3 strategies. Focus on one at a time, but you know, be aware that you should tailor this somewhat to your vendor base.
Okay, thanks. Question from Robert. We've tried to do this before. Any advice on getting around someone who roadblocks the project? We had an executive who wouldn't even discuss anything that impacted the metrics he was being measured on.
Yeah, again, you have to have that one executive sponsor. If you try to get everybody into the room at once, it just never goes well. But you have to do a lot to break down internal silos. Companies are just, you know, departments get very focused on the things they have to report up to their manager and their KPIs. And if everybody goes in defensive of their KPIs, then you're always going to have some conflict. What that ignores is the overall fact that you all work for the same company, and that there needs to be some overall strategic alignment. So, yeah, I don't know that there's always a good way to cut around somebody, because most people are strategic, but it's just trying to keep that overall what's strategic to the company focus, and if you picked the right executive sponsor who is really going to champion it, he can help you break through that. But there's usually one person who's a detractor, and you just need to make sure that you have strong support from your corner.
Okay. Another question from Alex. What does Perceptive Software do that supports projects like this?
So we are an AP automation company primarily. We help with discount capture and analytics. We also do some EDI and electronic invoicing plugins that help bring in that information. And so we speed up processing time. We help gather more information about your invoice activity and vendor base. And we've got referral partners on a lot of the other stuff that we sometimes work with. Not all of them. So for instance, like the credit card companies and supply chain financing, we actually don't refer people for those. They're interesting strategies, and I definitely want to talk about them, but it's not something we do. We are very much, we're a software company. We do content, OCR capture, data capture from a variety of sources, and workflow and process. Those are our software competencies, very focused around AP and procure-to-pay operations.
Okay, great. I'll take one more question, and then we'll close out for the day. If we want longer payment terms with our vendors, how do we actually go about doing that?
So that is something you want to work with your SBM organization on. I mean, again, you need to understand your vendor base and what your leverage points are. This may be a weird question for a lot of the AP people, because you're just probably, like, I know when I was more focused on AP and before I got into the procurement space, I didn't think about payment terms a lot. But really, if you understand, if you can get the information about what the metrics are, how big is that company versus how much are you spending with them, you understand more about their leverage, you understand when their contract negotiation cycle is, then you can bring a lot more to the table and be ready for that discussion. A lot of times, procurement isn't doing this homework, doesn't have the right information, isn't doing a strong negotiation. So partnering with them, it can help enhance the AP value to the organization, but also the end result is better contract negotiations. It's better term negotiations, and it's extended days to pay.
Terrific. I think we're going to end it there, give people a few minutes back in their day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We appreciated having Wes here to speak to you and appreciated you taking time from your busy schedules to join us. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we are recording this event, and we will make a link available to you if you want to forward it on to anyone else within your organization to have a listen. Thanks again for your time, and we hope to see you soon.